This is part 7 of Zechariah, Fire, Glory, and Escape. Fascinating, huh? Let's see what it says. We are in Zechariah chapter 2, starting in... Now, wait a minute. Oops. I showed you something in advance that I didn't mean to. Sorry, I'm just getting the hang of this technology stuff. I wanted to just briefly say that, in review, I'm often wanting to tell you just in review, because it's been a couple of weeks since we have studied the book of Zechariah. We were talking last time about in the prophetic future how Jerusalem will be inhabited with like unwalled villages in the open country because of the multitudes of men and beasts and cattle in it. And we understood from that it is likely a vision of the millennial kingdom when the Messiah rules on this planet in all of his glory. And there's a parallel passage in Isaiah 54, which I'm certain that you're familiar with, but I wanted to read it to you because I think it's really encouraging. And there are so many parallel passages like this, but I wanted to read you this one because it really ties together very well. And here's what it says in Isaiah 54:1. It says, "Shout for joy, O barren one, you who have borne no child. Break forth into joyful shouting and cry aloud, you who have not travailed. For the sons of the desolate one will be more numerous than the sons of the married woman, says Yah. Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch out the curtains of your dwellings. Spare not. Lengthen your cords and strengthen your pegs. For I will spread abroad to the right and to the left. For you will spread abroad to the right and the left. And your descendants will possess nations, and they will resettle the desolate cities. Fear not, for you will not be put to shame. Neither feel humiliated, for you will not be disgraced. But you will forget the shame of your youth, and the reproach of your widowhood you will remember no more. For your husband is your maker, whose name is Yehovah Zevaot, the Lord of hosts. And your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel, who is called the Mighty One of all the earth. For Yah has called you like a wife forsaken and grieved in spirit, even like a wife of one's youth when she is rejected, says your Mighty One. For a brief moment I forsook you, but with great compassion I will gather you. In an outburst of anger I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting loving kindness I will have compassion on you, says Yah, your Redeemer." And then skipping down to verse 16, "Behold, I myself have created the smith who blows the fire of coals and brings out a weapon for its work. And I have created the destroyer to ruin. No weapon that is formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that accuses you in judgment you will condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of Yah, and their vindication is from me, declares Yah." Now, you see so many different parallels to what we were reading in the first part of Zechariah chapter 2, where it was talking about, or at the end of chapter 1 even, talking about the craftsmen who come to terrify the nations. Here, Isaiah is talking about the smith, who blows the fires of coals. It's very, very similar language. And I think that they're both seeing the same thing. So that's just a brief review of where we have come from so far. And now we're talking about verse 5 in Zechariah chapter 2. And here's what it says there. I'm going to read this for you just to refresh you. It says in Zechariah 2:5, "For I, declares Yah, will be a wall of fire around her, and I will be the glory in her midst." We're going to deal with that passage. "Ho there, flee from the land of the north, declares Yah, for I have dispersed you as the four winds of the heavens, declares Yah. Ho Zion, escape, you who are living with the daughter of Babylon. For thus says Yah of hosts, after glory he has sent me against the nations which plunder you. For he who touches you touches the apple of his eye. For behold, I will wave my hand over them so that they will be plunder for their slaves. Then you will know that Yah of hosts has sent me. Sing for joy and be glad, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I am coming and I will dwell in your midst, declares Yah. And many nations will join themselves to Yah in that day and will become my people. Then I will dwell in your midst, and you will know that Yah of hosts has sent me to you. And Yah will possess Judah as his portion in the Holy Land and will again choose Jerusalem. Be silent, all flesh, before Yah, for he is aroused from his holy habitation. Now that is a powerful passage. And the first part that I want to deal with is this in verse 5. I, declares Yah, will be a wall of fire around her, and I will be the glory in her midst. Now, this phrase, and I'll show you this on the slide deck here. This is the Hebrew. That is chomah esh, a wall of fire. Now, this exact expression, wall of fire, is only used here in Zechariah. However, it does suggest protection from enemies. Now, the interesting thing about fire, it is a powerful, and yet I consider it like a spiritual force because it's intangible. You know that fire comes from burning logs, right? Generally speaking, something's burning. But the fire itself is a separate entity. The fuel is just the fire's, the fuel for the fire is its source. But, you know, fire is one of those mysterious, intangible, and yet incredibly powerful things. And so this wall of fire around Jerusalem, now I don't know if that's literal. It certainly could be. But this wall of fire language, chomah esh, is only used here, as I said. So you kind of have to use your Bible study methods, which we have talked about before, to begin to think about, well, where can I see something similar that might help me to understand what I'm dealing with here? And there's this concept which I know many of you are totally familiar with. It's called an equivalent expression. An equivalent expression expresses the same or a similar idea, just using different phraseology. For example, in the Bible, you'll often see the end times characterized using multiple different phrases. And I've listed a couple of them here. In that day, that's a dead giveaway that something is being spoken of about the end times. The last days, the last hour, the last times. There's tons of phrases in the Bible which are equivalent expressions. So, can you think of any examples of Yah protecting his people with fire? Not from fire, but with fire. Does anything pop into your mind? Any of you either online or in person here? Angela, what do you got? Excuse me?
I said the Holy Spirit. When the pillar of fire moved from behind them to in between them and the Egyptians.
Yeah, that's a great insight. When the pillar of fire moved between them and the Egyptians, that's what came to my mind. Hold on, Jerry, what do we got? Betsy, are you going to be able to speak? Yeah. I have yet to see this demonstrated. No, she cannot speak. Type it up. It'll come up. Just type it up. Was somebody else online had a hand raised? Yeah. No? Yes? No? Okay. Jerry, what do you got, buddy?
How about the three guys at fiery furnace?
Well, that's Yah protecting them from fire.
Okay.
I'm talking about Yah protecting his people with fire. That's a little bit different, but I totally pick up what you're putting down. Pastor Flowers, what do you got, buddy?
There's a time when it speaks of he was a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. It's not necessarily protecting them in the way you may be referencing to, but it was protecting them along their journey.
Yes, absolutely. That's definitely what I thought of too. David?
2 Kings chapter 6, I think it's has to do with Elisha and being surrounded by chariots of fire.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that, David. Brett?
Well, he kind of hit on what I was going to say, but also Elijah was protected when the prophets of Baal were trying to bring fire down from heaven, and Yah only took prophet Elijah's sacrifice and caused holy fire, set apart fire. But I was going to mention what he mentioned, 2 Kings. But
that's excellent. Excellent. Who else? Stephen? Where you at, Stephen? I ain't hearing you, brother.
I'm trying to get this stuff to work here. Genesis chapter 4, where God protected the Garden of Eden with fire. He kicked them out. He's not necessarily protecting them with fire, but he guarded the Garden of Eden with a flaming sword. So I just wanted to point that out.
That's a good one. I do like that. In fact, I think the equivalency there is quite interesting because we're talking about the Garden of Eden being protected by a cherubim, an angel with a flaming sword, and then we're talking about Jerusalem. Those two things are even probably more equivalent. That's a delightful insight. Tracy.
So I'm thinking of a couple. The Korah group, like there's in Numbers, what is it, 15, 16? 16. And it says a fire came out from Yah and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense. And then the fire that comes out from God that consumes Aaron's sons. It's this, I think, an idea of protecting the camp from the whatever wickedness that they were spreading. And then the two witnesses in Revelation, fire comes out of their mouth. I don't know, it's just kind of all, I don't know, it's connected, I think, in some way.
No, that's awesome. That's delightful. Brett, were you going to say something else?
No, I wasn't. I was just acknowledging what she was saying, that, yeah, fire, it cuts both ways, like the cherubim.
Yeah, absolutely. Good insight. Ella, were you going to say something?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Awesome. I don't know if this applies, but I know Elijah was taken up in a fiery chariot. I can't talk. And so he was, too good for the world. So I guess in a way, God was protecting him from the world and he took him away.
Yes. Good insight. Good insight. We've got lots of different examples of Yah protecting and punishing with fire. So that's awesome. That's delightful. Did you want to say something, Luke? No? Okay. So no, you're absolutely right. And I have chosen a couple of those because I want to go through them with you briefly to take a look at a couple of these. And you guys all mentioned some really good ones. So let me take a look here. I've got this passage from Exodus 19, which I think that is one that Angela or maybe somebody mentioned over there. I think Pastor Flowers might have mentioned it too in a roundabout way. It says in Exodus 14:19, and the angel of Elohim who had been going before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, and there was the cloud along with the darkness. Yet it gave light at night. Thus the one did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and Yah swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided. And the sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And then the Egyptians took up the pursuit, and all of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen went in after them into the midst of the sea. And it came about at the morning watch that Yah looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. And he caused their chariot wheels to swerve, and he made them drive with difficulty. So the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from Israel, for Yah is fighting for them against the Egyptians." Now that's a supernatural protection by Yah for his people. Now the fire doesn't seem to have been totally involved in this, but the fire of protection is definitely present, and you see that protection. The next one that I want to share with you briefly is 2 Kings in chapter 6, which I think was one that David mentioned. This one's even a little bit more interesting because it seems to be a circular fire. In 2 Kings 6:14 it says, "And he," that is the king of Aram, "sent horses and chariots and a great army that is to Dothan, to find Elisha," because he was being eavesdropped on and he couldn't tell why his enemies kept figuring out what he was going to do before he himself knew. "And they came by night and surrounded this city. And now when the attendant of the man of Elohim had risen early and gone out, behold, an army with horses and chariots was circling the city. And his servant said to him, 'Alas, my master, what shall we do?' So he answered, 'Do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Then Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. And Yah opened the servant's eyes, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And when they came down to him, Elisha prayed to Yah and said, strike this people with blindness, I pray. So he struck them with blindness. He struck them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. And then Elisha said to them, this is not the way. This is nor is this the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek. And he brought them to Samaria. These are not the droids you were looking for. I mean, talk about some fascinating. He pulled a Jedi mind trick on these Arameans, but talk about some interesting parallels. So we didn't have wall of fire anywhere else in the scripture except here in Zechariah, but we've got lots of different parallels of Father protecting his people through fire. And I think it's instructive for us to think about these things and look at them to figure out what does this tell us about the millennial kingdom in Jerusalem. He also says in the Revelation that there's be no need for the sun and moon, because he himself is the light therein. So we're seeing some very interesting pictures. Now, I would ask you this. In regard to these passages, in regard to these parallel passages that we've read, and I'm trying to understand what does Yah mean about this encircling fire that is a protection for his people, why do you think it's important for us and for Zechariah's audience to hear this? Why is that important to hear? Is it just some trivial detail? Is it just some fanciful poetic language that Yah is going to be a flaming fire around his people, Tracy?
I was going through looking at in the Hebrew where wall and fire are used, and it's very interesting because that's how the nations burned down Jerusalem. They burned so their gates were burned with fire. It's the same two Hebrew words. And then I kept looking, and I was seeing in several of the prophets that is how Yah is going to destroy their gates with fire. So it's like judging as they were judged, and this thing that you meant for evil, I'm going to protect with that very thing. Just like Brett was saying, it cuts both ways. So there seems to be, like we were just talking about, how the nations are at ease and at peace, and they've done these things to his people, and he's going to take those things that they've done and make it into a hedge of protection. So I don't know, that's just what I was seeing.
No, that's a great insight. And I think it also points to, and you have seen before, that the principle from the Torah is that if you seek to bring evil upon your neighbor, that evil will be brought upon you. That is what is very common in the Torah. So that's very, very interesting. Brett, were you going to say something, or is your hand raised on accident? Okay. David. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Lou and then David.
Okay. Well, animals are afraid of fire.
Yeah.
Well, the devil goes around like a
roaring
lion.
Yeah.
And so God, to me, has a fire around me so that I am protected.
Yeah. Good insight. Good insight. I like that a lot. In fact, I actually did research on this, and I came across a bunch of interesting stories about the Dutch when they were exploring Africa, 700 years ago, having to deal with lions that were trying to rip people out of the camp, Fire was the thing that was protecting them. I'm coming back to you in just a second, Jerry. David?
This is something that I was going to bring up in last family get-together that we talked about, just what we were studying. I kind of let other people try to have a chance to and just listen, right? But we have hit one of the most prophetic passages in the entire Bible, in my opinion. And what I'm going to, so here's your, crazy moment brought to you from the state of Ohio, is there's a passage in the New Testament in John where it speaks of 153 fish. And trust me, I've been thinking on this forever and ever and ever. And then God, I felt, revealed something to me, right? It's a mess. The fish is it has to do with the feeding the 5,000. He feeds them with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. By the way, that's 7, right? If you go to Revelation, there are 7 churches. I believe 2 of the churches are the houses of Israel and 5 Gentile churches, right? So that 153 fish is a message to the houses of Israel. And what's crazy about it is what I saw was 15 and 3, the 15th day of the 3rd month, right? And so I went and looked up the parsha for, it's the 36th parsha at that time of the year. And guess what passages it has? It has 2 beautiful passages, one from Numbers, and the other is from none other than 2nd Zechariah. And they're extremely end time prophetic. When you read it, you're going to go, oh my gosh. But that's it. Just food for thought as you move through Zechariah to take a look at the 36th parsha.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. That seems cryptic, and I like cryptic. Jerry has a microphone. I'm going to Jerry, and then I'm going back to Stephen and Tracy. Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking an angel is called a flaming fire.
Yes, his ministers are a flaming fire.
If we've all got a guardian angel when we're born, or when we become a Christian, then we've got a flaming fire around us. Just going on to what Lou said. That's our flaming fire. That's our hope. That's our shield. That's everything that we need. God will protect us with that.
It's an interesting idea. Angela's coming to remove that microphone from you. Stephen.
Yeah, I was going to point everyone's attention to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 23 and 24. And it reads, "Take heed to yourselves, lest you forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which he made with you, and make for yourselves a carved image in the form of anything which the Lord your God has forbidden you. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God." And Paul quotes that same exact text in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 29, and that speaks to how important God holds fidelity in regards to his relationship with his people, but how jealous he is for his people. So maybe in Zechariah, very possibly, when the people heard that, they understood that God is protecting them from their enemy because he's very jealous for his people, right? And that he'll consume things in your life that will take you away or hinder your relationship with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good insight. I like it a lot. Thank you, Stephen. Angela.
I wanted to go back to what Jerry just said about the cherubim being fire. And would the veil with the woven cherubim on it in front of the ark be like a wall of fire? Because then in the temple, didn't you have more like statues of the cherubim all around it? So again, maybe a picture of fire protecting his throne.
Yeah, I think there were seraphim or cherubim, embroidered on the veil between the holy and the most holy, and then I think also on the front cover of the tabernacle in the wilderness, and possibly also on the curtains surrounding the enclosure.
And when
right?
Ezekiel sees his throne, is there something similar to that?
Yeah, and Ezekiel's throne. Yeah, absolutely.
Angels.
Good insight. So you guys have brought out some really amazing insights into this fire scenario, but I want to go back to my question, which is, why do you think that it is important for Zechariah's listeners to hear that, and why might it be important for you to hear that Yah is an encompassing fire? Do you think about the exiles? What might they be thinking of? Is this going to be helpful, encouraging to them? Is it helpful or encouraging to you, Stephen?
Well, I think I just mentioned it, so I'm kind of curious where you're going with it.
Well, thank you for asking. I'll tell you. Brett, go ahead, buddy.
Are you kind of pointing like, do not quench or extinguish the Ruach, or he will put out your lampstand, or just trusting in him to provide divine protection?
That's good questions. I think more than anything, I am thinking in my own mind about just a general sense of encouragement that this would be for those exiles who, there's not very many of them, and they have left Babylon, which I think ties right back into what he was talking about in the next verses, like flee from Babylon. But these people have fled from Babylon and have gone to the Holy Land, and they're kind of out there on their own, and they're being harassed. If you read in Ezra and Nehemiah, they got a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other, trying to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And so if they hear, and we know that Zechariah was prophesying at the same time as Ezra and Nehemiah, right? So that if he's telling these people in the future, but maybe even in their minds now, they can begin to see, wait a minute, you mean we don't need to worry about these people who are all around us threatening us because Yah is a wall of fire around us right now? I think that prophecy is cyclical, that it is continuously and in a cycle fulfilled in a greater way each time it is fulfilled. Because you might be looking at yourself thinking, okay, so he's talking about fleeing Babylon, right? But at the time of this writing, Babylon had already been defeated by the Medo-Persian Empire, and frankly, would never rise again. There's no vestiges left over of the Babylonian Empire, and there hasn't been for 3,000 years. The Babylonian Empire collapsed long, long ago, but we still keep hearing these prophetic words from Jeremiah, from the book of Revelation, telling people to flee from Babylon. But we'll get to that in a moment. I'm curious about I want to remind you that the Lord your God is a flaming fire around you now. He will be a flaming fire around his entire encampment in that day. But he's also, I think, at a flame of fire around you now. And I think, frankly, there are few things more important than hope in troubled times. Are we living in troubled times? Yes. Were they living in troubled times? Yes. Do we need encouragement? Yes. Do you need to know that your God is a flaming fire surrounding you? Yes, you do. Absolutely. And I want to share a passage with you from the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, which I think really speaks to this. He says in chapter 10:23 of Hebrews, let us grasp tightly to the confession of our hope. We hope for a city of Jerusalem coming down, our Messiah living there with us, and the fire of protection all around us, right? That is our living hope. Without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. What is the day that he's talking about? It's the day that we're studying. It's that day. So in that day, all these things are going to happen. And we need, as we approach that day, all the more, says the writer of Hebrews, to be encouraging one another. And I think remembering that your God is a wall of fire all around you is something that you want to keep in mind. I will move on from this. I think we've beaten that horse into a pulp, and I thank you for discussing it with me. You guys had some great insights. Now, I want to go on to glory in her midst. He says that he is not only going to be a wall of fire around her, but he's going to be the glory in her midst. And here I will just share with you the glory is two different words here. This is kavod. They're both pronounced kavod, but one has a vav in there and the other does not. They're pronounced the same way. And you guys know that kavod, does anyone know what the literal meaning of the word kavod is? This is the Hebrew word that is translated as glory all throughout the Tanakh, the Old Testament. Does anyone know what it means literally? It means, wait, Brett's going to tell us. What's up, Brett?
Liver.
Huh?
Liver.
Yes, it can.
Liver.
Yes, it is often translated as liver. And do you know why?
The heaviest organ in your body.
It's because it's the heaviest organ in your body. And the word is most often translated as heavy. You ever heard that song, He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother? What did the hippies mean when they said, hey man, that's heavy? Well, what they literally meant was that's profound. That's impressive. That's awe-inspiring. So when you're thinking kavod, liver, you're really thinking literally heavy. Now, I want to show you a couple of places in the text where kavod is translated. You can see here that it's heavy. It's used throughout the scripture. The primary meaning is heavy, but also severe, overwhelming, etc. It can have a negative or a positive connotation. And here's a couple of passages where you see this. In Genesis 12 and 10, it says, now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe, heavy in the land. Okay, and then in Genesis 13:1, it says, so Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, and he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Abram was very rich. Abram was heavy in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And then in Genesis 45, Joseph is saying, now you must tell my father of all my splendor. Another word, heavy. You must tell him of all my splendor in Egypt and all that you have seen, and you must hurry and bring my father down here. Now in Exodus 20, you're starting to get a little bit of a different connotation, and I think we're hitting closer to home when we're talking about glory. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which Yah your Elohim is giving you. That is literally telling you, when it says honor your father and your mother, that means consider them to have great weight. Consider your father and mother with great gravity. Now we're starting to get closer to the meaning of honor and glory. So he says he's going to be the glory in the midst of Jerusalem. And here's the next couple of passages. In Exodus 33, we're getting closer to it. Then Moses said, I pray you, show me your glory. And he said, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you, because you can't handle my glory, and will proclaim the name of Yah before you, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show compassion on whom I will show compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live. And then Yah said, behold, there is a place by me, and you shall stand there on the rock. And it will come about, while my glory is passing by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. And then in Exodus 24, it says, and to the eyes of the sons of Israel, the appearance of the glory of Yehovah was like a consuming fire on the mountaintop. So you're seeing all these different connotations of the word glory, kavod, in Hebrew. Now, this is fascinating to me, and when you look at, we're starting to see that his presence is really what is making his people conspicuous. You know, when someone brings glory to themselves, what is the cause of that often? They're very prideful, generally speaking, yes. What reason might they have for glorying in themselves? They might have a lot of money. They might have fame. Any other of those things that you can draw attention and glory to yourself. But our God is telling us that in that day, He will be the thing that causes glory to accrue to His people. He is the thing that makes them stand out. And I think that you should consider, and I would hardly recommend that we recognize that it's not our wealth or our military might or our reputation as a nation or as a nation of Israel when they are in the land that's going to give them glory. It is Yah Himself that is going to be their glory. In fact, He is the reason that humanity has any significance at all. You've heard the passage. It's like, what is man that you consider him? He's nothing. Without the spirit that Yah gives to a man, he's nothing. He's just an animal. He is the reason that we have any good in us individually, right? It's this Holy Spirit that's inside of us. We can't give glory. We can't receive glory for ourselves. It says in one of the books of Paul, I can't remember, you'll probably be able to tell me which, that he prepared these good works for us beforehand, before the foundation of the world, in order that we might walk in them. So that brings glory to him. It doesn't bring any glory to us. And I think that one of the things that I would just point out to you is that he will receive all the glory, we will receive none, and anything that is good, that is drawing heaviness and weight to these people, to this city, to the situation, it's all him. There's nothing there for us to take any glory for ourselves, right? Does that make sense? So I think that that is what I would say in regards to him saying he will be the glory in her midst. He will be the thing that draws the attention of all the nations to say, let's come. You know, you've heard in other passages, come, let's go up to Jerusalem. Let's go up to Zion and see what's going on. The Holy One of Israel is there. So he is going to be the glory of his entire people. And he is the reason that anybody's interested in what's happening there, right? Now, as a final thing, it is 8 o'clock, and I don't want to keep you too long. I know I got a lot of you on the East Coast, so I'm going to share with you briefly regarding this passage starting in verse 6 where it says, flee from the north. Now, the purpose of this admonition regarding fleeing from Babylon is likely threefold, okay? On a practical level, for the readers of this book, it is to chastise those who remained in Babylon. Or, according to verse 8, I believe it is, where it says, you know, the daughter of Babylon, it would be very realistic to look at Media and Persia as daughters of Babylon, offspring of Babylon. So he is likely, on a very practical level, admonishing those of the Jews from Judea who had been transported to Babylon, saying, come back here. You're going to miss out on everything. Flee from the land of the north. But what's interesting is that at the time that Zechariah is prophesying this, Babylon has already been defeated by the Medo-Persian Empire, as I mentioned to you briefly before. So it's not like he can be saying to those Jews who had stayed in Babylon, flee from there or you will partake of her destruction, because that's already happened. So we then know that we must be thinking more prophetically into the future. Now, when he starts talking about the daughter of Babylon, he could be talking about the Medo-Persian Empire, because we know that Esther and Mordecai and a bunch of Jews are living in the Persian Empire. That's very well documented. So is he telling them, get out of there? You need to flee there? Or is he talking into the prophetic future? Now, those are the two things that I want to explore with you next. Is he literally telling people to flee from some physical location? Or is he speaking spiritually? We're going to have to kind of break that out. David, I'm going to let you go for it, buddy.
So I'm going to try to tie it back to what the passage about protecting Israel with fire. There's a passage I would call your attention to. It's like the 29th chapter of Exodus. And specifically, the part I want to call your attention to is the order of the sacrifices. So there's 3 sacrifices specifically I want to call your attention to: a bull and 2 rams, right? So the bull, like I said, often animals are reflective of a particular type of people. David in Psalms refers to, he's surrounded by the bulls of Bashan, probably while Jesus is on the cross. I'm surrounded by the bulls of Bashan, right? This is an evil entity kind of thing. And I want to tie back that in Daniel, he makes a reference to a ram, which is specifically what you said, Medo-Persia, right? So I think that he's saying, I'm going to protect Israel in the end, right? And here's the order of which they come, so that you know that I'm telling the truth. Now, we probably won't be here to see it, thank God. But
yeah, no, that's a good insight, David. I appreciate that, and I would encourage you to study that out on your own a little bit more, because I think it is instructive. And I will circle back around to that perhaps. But I want to also bring to your attention that it's hard for me to look at this in a purely physical way, to say flee from a physical land and protect yourself from the wrath of the Father, right? Because Babylon's been destroyed for a long time. But I suppose the Jews could have returned at any time until the final Roman expulsion. But why would they have? Frankly, if I'm looking at it just from a historical perspective, thinking, oh, we're talking about Jews fleeing some foreign land and going back to the Holy Land, if the Greeks, perhaps if they had come back in the days of Zechariah and done what they were supposed to do, then Antiochus Epiphanes and the Greeks would have never invaded in the first place. Maybe they could have gotten around that particular hardship. Or maybe if they had been faithful when the Messiah arrived on the scene, they might have spared themselves the Roman exile. But going back to the land physically, I don't know that that was what was being spoken of here. Does anybody have any ideas about that? Do you think that, well, let me share with you two passages that I think will be perhaps instructive for you. I want to share with you Jeremiah 51, because this has remarkably similar language in it. Jeremiah 51, and starting in verse 6, says, "Flee from the midst of Babylon, and each of you save his life. Do not perish in her punishment, for this is Yah's time of vengeance. He is going to repay to her what she deserves. Babylon has been a golden cup in the hand of Yah, intoxicating all the earth. The nations have drunk of her wine. Sharpen the arrows," in verse 11. "Fill the quivers. Yah has stirred up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, because his plan is against Babylon to destroy it, for it is the vengeance of Yah, vengeance for his temple. Come out from her midst, my people, and each of you save yourselves from the fierce anger of Yah." Now, this is fascinating. What is curious about this? Did anybody see anything a little bit? Thinking about Jeremiah and the time that he's writing, what's curious about this? Who is it? I can't see. I'm on the wrong tab. It's David Branton. What's up, David?
Yeah, I'm hearing Revelation as you're reading Jeremiah.
Yes,
right?
this is absolutely a complete parallel to the book of Revelation chapter 18, and we're coming to that in just a second. Do you notice anything, David, about what's curious about this, though?
I'm going to let you run with it, but I read it. I hear Revelation being, the harlot and the cup of iniquity and all of drink. The mystery of Babylon, I would only offer that all nations have been deceived, and it's a system. It's a worldwide system, and I believe it's come out of that system, right? It's not a place.
Keep that in your back pocket for a second, David. We're going to talk about that. The thing that I'm coming to you, Jacqueline, in just a moment, and Stephen. The thing that's interesting here is, when is Jeremiah writing? Jeremiah was living at the time that the Babylonians were invading Jerusalem. He's predicting the future here. The Medo-Persians haven't even come on the scene yet. And he is telling you in verse 11 that Yah is stirring up the king of the Medes to destroy Babylon. And the Jews, many of them, have not even been taken into exile yet. There are very few Jews in Babylon at the time that Jeremiah is saying this. So that's a little bit of a curiosity, don't you think? So that, to me, so many of these passages really speak to me that and you know that there has been a thing that has gone around, especially in the Hebrew Roots movement, that as the end times approach, you need to flee where you're living and flee to, I don't know, there was a period of time when people were fleeing to, where was that? It was like in Jordan or something. Yeah, there are people thinking they're going to escape the tribulation by fleeing to Jordan or something. And like, if you want to equate America with Babylon, I'm all for that. That's totally fine. You're living in Babylon. If you want to say that, you'll get no argument from me. But can you flee from Babylon literally? There are very few cases to be made in the historical record of you actually having an opportunity to flee physically from Babylon. I don't personally think it's physical at all. There's one instance that comes to my mind, which has probably come to yours as well, that there was a time when people listened to a prophet of Yah telling them, when you see the army surrounding the city of Jerusalem, then you shall flee. And according to the historical record, those people who had accepted the message of Yeshua heard that, saw what was coming, and got the heck out of there. And those people did not go back to that land for 1,800 years. So, is it a physical saving of your neck by fleeing a physical location? Doubtful. It's a pretty rare thing. Is it a spiritual come out of her, my people? 100%. And we will talk more about that later. I want to go to some questions. Jacqueline, you're up, sister.
One of the things that's interesting to me about Babylon that is not said to my knowledge, and maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the thing that is Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, when he sees that image of the statue, God says that he made him not only king over all the nations, but he also said he made him king over all the wild beasts, which I don't remember anybody else being made king over wild beasts. And so I feel like that has something to do with this as to why this connection to Babylon, even though Babylon has ceased to exist, because I feel like in the time that he's prophesying about, that it's not just going to be the nations of the earth, but it's going to be this wild beast spirit that is a loose. Well, not even the beast also. But I do feel like it is the beast, and I feel like that there's more to it than just that, because I feel like there's a mixing of seed and a defamation of humanity during that time period. Like humans, there will be humans who will cease to be human. They will get mixed up in something where they will cease to be fully human.
That's certainly, yeah, you can certainly see things perhaps head in that direction. Absolutely. So yeah, good insight. I'm gonna kick it over to Lou for just a moment, and then I'm going to kick it back over to Stacy. No, Stephen, and then Stacy Sears or Andy, whoever is wanting to talk.
I just have a question.
Yes, please.
Well, when we're thinking about Babylon
Yes.
and Jerusalem, we're talking about cities.
Well, yes, theoretically, but I think that what she was mentioning, and I would definitely agree, is that Babylon encompasses the whole earth.
Okay.
It's a spirit, it's a system, rather than just a city. It's an assembly of people. You could call it a city back in the day. Yeah, it's a city, but it's also an assembly of people of like mind and like kind. I think I would say it that way. Good question. Good question. Stephen, you're up, buddy.
I was just going to point out that the consistent pattern in the Old Testament scripture is a literal physical coming out, because Israel was called to be separate, to be holy or set apart. And from the time that they were separated from Egypt, Abraham was separated from the Ur of the Chaldeans in his ancestral land. So there's a consistent pattern of a separation that God requires. And when we get to the New Testament, and I'm skipping all the way ahead to application. How do we apply this to our lives? Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, that all these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages has come. So we've come into the fullness of the knowledge, because we've obviously come into faith in Jesus Christ. So now it's more of a separation, not a physical leaving America like you mentioned earlier and going to Jordan, but separating ourselves from the ways of the world. In 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17, it says, "Therefore come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, says Yahweh Almighty." So I think spiritually, kind of what you were getting to is we should separate ourselves in the way that we live and the way that we think. That's how we separate from Babylon, I think, today. That's how we can apply that.
100%. 100%. Agree with you 100%. Andy or Stacy, whichever of you wants to pipe up.
Stacy. Along the same line, along the same lines of what Stephen was saying, I think of Babylon by its literal definition, which is confusion. And so a system of confusion causes the people of Yah to not walk straight. And so in that verse on the screen in Jeremiah 51:6, it says, Babylon has been a golden cup in the hand of Yah, intoxicating all the earth. Well, the idea of someone who's intoxicated or drunk is they stagger to the left, they stagger to the right, they don't walk straight. And we are not to add to or take away from. We're not to veer to the left or veer to the right. If we do, we are as a drunk person. He wants us to be sober and walk straight. And so, like when Yeshua addressed the Pharisees and Sadducees, or when he was cautioning his disciples, he said, when they sit in Moses' seat, do what they say, but don't do what they do, because they don't practice what they preach. And so the Pharisees and Sadducees were as branches of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I mean, this confusion goes all the way back to the beginning, because that tree represents a person, that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so you have a tree or a branch or a man who bears the fruit of the knowledge of good, which is the ways of Yah, and the knowledge of evil, which is anything that contaminates his way and causes his people to not walk straight. And so that's what I think of the system of Babylon. It's any system, usually a religious system, but causes his people, it pollutes the ways of Yah with traditions and doctrines of men, so that they don't walk straight. Stacy, that's a delightful insight, and I think that is one of the things that we're going to have to sort out when we get together next time to start talking a little bit more about this, because I think that many people have an idea in their minds that Babylon is a worldly system that you need to get yourself out of. And to a degree, I'm okay with that. That's fine. But I think when you look at, especially in the book of Revelation, and we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, but you're really looking at two different systems there. You've got a beast system, which is secular power, and then you've got a Babylonian system. Remember that this drunken harlot woman with a cup in her hand, which is referenced right here in Jeremiah 51, is riding the beast. So you're talking about two different systems here. You've got a beast system, which is politically, economically, socially ruling the earth. And then you've got this drunken whore who's riding that beast with a golden cup in her hand, reeling drunk. She's a religious whore. So what does that tell us? This tells us that when he says, come out of Babylon, did you know that most interpreters of the Bible looking at these passages about coming out of Babylon, I guarantee I probably don't need to tell you, what do they interpret this as? I'm sorry, Lou, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. You're not going to like it, but I'll say it anyway. It's coming out of the Catholic Church. All of the Protestant reformers interpreted all of these passages and said, the Catholic Church is a whore of Babylon. We're coming out of her. Now, that was historical for them, and I'm not calling the Catholic Church the whore of Babylon, but most people who have interpreted these passages have understood when he says come out of Babylon, he's talking about coming out of a religious system. Now, that's a little bit frightening, because you got to look around you and say, what am I coming out of? Well, you got to, just like Stacy said a second ago, you got to look at what are they doing in these religious systems that you're talking about. Are they mixing up things of the world with the things of God? That's what Babylon is all about. How do you get confusion? How can you not tell one color from the other? You mix them together,
right? Red is no longer red. When you mix it with yellow, it's brown. You can't tell what's what when you mix everything together. So that's going to be a deeper conversation, but we're going to have to deal with that. Tracy, you go, girl.
Just to, kind of talk a little bit more about the Babylon thing is that when you need to consider who is the head, who is the king, spiritually speaking, who is the ruler of this earth, this world. We know that that is Satan. That's what the scriptures teach us. And Isaiah 14 is where it talks about taking up this proverb against the king of Babylon. And then later it says how the oppressor has ceased, how the golden city ceased. So we got the color gold again. And then it says in verse 12, how you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. So now we're kind of getting a picture of who we're talking to. And then it's going to go down a little bit further. You said, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit in the mount of the Moed. And this is Babylon. I'm going to make this tower to heaven. I'm going to make a name for myself. So he's at the head of this. This is the spiritual king of Babylon. This is Satan we're talking about. And he went and took Messiah himself on the top of the temple and said, all these kingdoms I will give you if you'll fall down and worship me. So I think that's what we're looking at. And again, Babylon means confusion, but the root word is mix or mingle. So it's confusion by mixing. That's what everybody else has been saying thus far, is that back in the garden, that was his MO, to get you to go against what God's word, his pure seed, said, by getting you to eat of a mingled seed, which was going to defile your fruit. So this is what we're supposed to come out of. And then she, the harlot, is sitting, the mother of harlots, is sitting on the back of this mystery Babylon, sitting on the back of this beast in the wilderness. But the true bride is Yahovah carries on eagle's wings in the wilderness. So there's this parallel, these two women, one's a harlot, has a harlot's forehead, and this is in Jeremiah talking about his people. So I think that's what we're seeing. Again, religious systems, people who claim to come in the name, but you will know them by their fruit, whether it's defiled or whether it's clean.
No, absolutely. Excellent insight. I'm going to start to wrap up, so if you've got a comment to make it snappy, folks. David, you're up next, buddy.
I was just going to piggyback on what Tracy just said. And in the Old Testament, the two houses, Judah and Israel, are referred to as sisters, and they both play the harlot, if you will. So we're talking about religious systems, right? There's two notable women in Revelation. There's a bride and there's a harlot. So these are definitely religious systems. I'm going to double down with one last remark, which is Isaiah says in chapter 13 that Babylon, the physical place, will never rise again. So it's not a physical place. That's it.
I think Sir Seal was before me, Alan.
Yeah, hey everyone. I was just thinking about Matthew 7:21-23 as we was talking about coming out of Babylon. But I had a question. What does that look like for us today? I think Stephen mentioned it a little bit, but I find myself when I'm talking to my friends, it's always a debate, and I don't want it to be like, if I talk about food loss, it's just like, oh, do you have a railing around your house? And so
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Sir Seal, and I think we won't have time to deal with that this evening, although I would very much like to. When we get back together again, I have a feeling this is going to be a big topic of conversation. So the next time we get together, coming out of Babylon is going to be the big topic of conversation. And I think we are going to put to bed the idea that we are literally physically going to come out of Babylon, because I don't think that's going to happen. I think Yah is going to take his people out of Babylon just like he brought them out of Egypt. Only this time you won't have anything to do with it. I mean, you've heard about the second Exodus. He's doing it himself. No one will be able to say, I saved myself, I was smart, I was wise, I listened to Yah, and he told me to pack up my stuff and get out of this area. I don't think that's likely to happen. But what I do think is it's very much a spiritual thing. And what does that look like? It looks like a lot of different things. It does look like coming out of this culture in a lot of ways. It also looks a lot like coming out of religion. I don't hear me saying, that you need to stop going to church or something, but you need to be real careful with the religion that you're involved in, because you know that religion has a bad name in a lot of, it doesn't sit well on the tongue when you say religion. If people say, I'm religious, well, that can mean a lot of different things. People say, I had a friend of mine, I think I mentioned to you a while back, that was like, I said, well, how are you doing spiritually in your life? And he's like, well, I go to church and I read my Bible and I pray. And I said, that don't mean much. I mean, should you read your Bible? Yes, absolutely. Should you pray? Of course you should. Should you go to church? Yes. Do you think there's a bunch of people in the church who are not really connected to God? Yep. Do you think there's a lot of people around this world who pray and they don't really have a connection with God? Their prayer is an abomination. Their prayer is inhibited by the relationship that they have with their wife, according to Peter? Yes. Okay, there are lots and lots of people out there in the university system who are teaching the Bible. They're way smarter than me, but they don't know our God. Not even close. So now I asked this person, have you read Galatians 5 lately? How's your love? How's your peace? How's your self-control? How's your wisdom? That's the fruit of the Spirit that suggests what system you are from. So I would say that's the key question to ask. The religious system that you're a part of, or your religious standing, is judged by your fruit, not your doctrine. Now I know you'll hear me say this over and over and over. You got to have right doctrine, because my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, right? You got to have the right knowledge, but the right knowledge is not going to cut it. It ain't. If you ain't letting Yeshua have his way in your life and the Spirit live out through you, and you're producing no fruit, you've heard all the sayings that Yeshua said. Step back. I don't know you. I don't want that to happen to any of you. Stephen, you get the last word, brother.
That was really just, I share the same sentiment, and I want to just kind of come back to what Stacy was mentioning earlier about the drunkenness. And in Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse 15, Paul says, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And do not be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. So Paul is making a contrast, right? So drunkenness, like Stacy said, makes people stagger. And as people who are called out of Babylon, when the world tells us to watch R-rated movie, we should stagger all around that, because we're filled with something besides wine, right? When the world tells us to believe in transgenderism, we should stagger all over that, because we're filled with something else besides liquid wine that inebriates. So I think this calling out of Babylon, like you said, is a spiritual calling out, so that we can exemplify ourselves as being separated from the world, not necessarily because we wear the tzitzit, and I know that's a good thing, but because of the type of lives that we live in this world, representing the Father and His Son, Jesus Christ. Absolutely. So that's pretty much it.
Amen. Amen, brother. Thank you for sharing that. I want to thank you guys for your time. As always, it's just delightful to have this opportunity to get together with all of you and read through the Word and see what it's saying to us. And so next time, if the Father wills that I should be alive, in 2 weeks' time, I will get back together and we will discuss with you the next in the series here, which I think is going to be heavily weighted regarding coming out of Babylon. I think that's a really important discussion that we're going to have. As you know, next week is the third Friday of the month, so we will not be meeting. Everyone will be meeting in private fellowship with their families in smaller groups, so that's awesome. It's always a delight. So the following week, we will get together again and we will study the book of Zechariah and talk about coming out of Babylon. That'll be a fascinating discussion, and I encourage you to be part of it. I think there will be some good learning.